This is Mark Kermode. Welcome to this Curzon living room Q&A. We're very lucky today that we're going to be joined by Mark Jenkin, the director of the brilliant movie Bait, which is, I think, my favorite film of recent years. We'd love to have you joining in the conversation. So if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, you can write your questions in the comments. And if you're watching on Twitter, you can tweet us your questions using the hashtag Curzon Living Room, and we'll read out a selection of your questions during the interview. I'm joined now all the way from Newlyn in Cornwall by Mark Jenkin. Mark, welcome to the internet.
Thank you. Hello. Good to see you.
How's things down there? Are you at home? Are you in your study or your living room?
Yeah, I'm up in the sort of the small office we got at the house. I'm not going to the studio obviously at the moment, so this is my world at the moment, at least my work world. But yeah, it's all strange, isn't it? But becoming more and more normal, I suppose, as the routines establish themselves. But this is a nice break from normality.
It seems particularly peculiar to be talking about a film like Bait, which is made in such a handmade, old-fashioned, traditional way on the internet. The internet, I have to say, is something which by which I'm still baffled. So I'm just trusting that this is actually working. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the precursor to Bait, where you started experimenting with the format of the clockwork cameras, and because you were working in video, and then you had a kind of epiphany about getting back into film. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I started out working on Super 8 when I was 16, 17 years old. I was shooting Super 8 because I'm 44 now. So at the time when I started making films as a teenager, there were a few video cameras around, but they weren't easy to get hold of. So Super 8 was still the format that was readily available. So I started shooting Super 8, made single reel unedited films, and made my own soundtracks on cassette and played them whilst projecting the film unedited. And that's how I got into film, really. And then as I progressed and studied film, I then that the sort of low end early digital video was coming out, and I started shooting with that mini DV, that kind of thing, and really enjoyed that format. And I suppose I just went along with what was happening with technical developments and really didn't think about the form. Whatever new camera came out, I would use that camera. I would go with whatever I was expected to shoot with. And then probably 10 years ago, I began to just drift away from filmmaking, really. I was still watching a lot of stuff, but my appetite to make stuff was diminishing. I was shooting more and more stuff on a mobile phone that I had, but just for me, really, just experimental stuff. And then the feature films that I was developing by then, or trying to get off the ground, I was losing interest in them a little bit, because I was what I realized later on, I would become disconnected with the form. And I think I'd fallen out of love with the workflow and the aesthetic of where the form had gone. And at that point, I decided to go back and shoot Super 8 again and start making experimental work again, single roll films, not editing, not spending loads of time in front of a computer, just embracing the tactility of the film format. And because at that point, sort of I suppose this must be like 7 years ago when I really started getting into it. A lot of the labs had closed. It was very difficult to get Super 8 processed. So I looked up on the internet how to do it myself and try different experimental ways of doing it, and just kind of fell in love with the craft of filmmaking again, while still developing these longer projects in a more conventional way. And then I just one day just thought, what if I just employed those experimental techniques that I loved doing so much, but were almost being discouraged to employ them for my feature work. And a lot of that came from me, and then just decided to make a narrative film with those experimental techniques. And that was a film called Bronco's House in 2000 and I can't even remember, 15, I think, 14, 15, which then was the precursor to Bait.
I remember the first time we met was in a fish processing plant in Newlyn, which it had stopped its old usage, and it's now turned into a wonderful cinema. Yeah. And there was an exhibition on there, and I was there with Tom Rickman, who's an artist who was playing bass, and I was playing guitar. And you took some photographs. There was a power cut, and we were the only people that could make any noise because there wasn't any power in the building. And then a little while later, you sent me a beautiful photograph that you'd taken, and it had this wonderful kind of sepia tone to it. And I got in touch with you and said, "This is great. How did you do it?" You suggested it myself in my studio with coffee. And that was the first time I became aware of your sort of your handmade process. Once you'd started that handmade thing, was it evident to you from the beginning that you were going to make a feature? Because Bronco's House is 45, 50 minutes long. It's one thing doing that process, but did you always have a feature in mind?
Yeah, I had the 45-minute film in mind first, really because that Bronco's House came out of a treatment that I'd written for a different film that I was commissioned to write, which I was commissioned to write a very commercial feature film, which the producer wanted me to be the Cornish full Monty. And I wrote a film, and it wasn't called Bronco's House at that point. It was called something else, but it was this story about a sort of a kind of popular resistance that grew within Cornwall. But it was very comedic and very light-hearted, but it didn't have enough content in it really to sustain a feature film. So when I decided I wanted to do something using this experimental technique, I took that project off the shelf and looked at it and thought, actually, it failed to get off the ground as a feature film, but as a 45-minute film, it may well work. And I wanted to make something that I wanted to keep the expectations low, really. So I thought, I'll make a short, but I'll make a long short. I knew that if we shot a 45-minute long film, I'd probably need to shoot maybe 60 rolls of film, which would probably take 3 to 6 months to hand process. So I wanted to do something substantial, but not a feature film, because, like you say, it's a different endeavor. But we made Bronco's House, and what was great about it is it was really well received. And like Kodak got behind it because they were sort of amazed at at how it was made. So they paid for a 35mm print of it to be made and all of that kind of stuff. It did quite well, but because of the duration, it was so uncommercial as a proposition. I think I found the absolute sweet spot of non-commercial duration because we technically didn't even exist for some festivals, because we'd go to put it into a festival and the guidelines would be, under 40 minutes a short, over 45 minutes a feature, and we were 44 minutes. So we just fell through the cracks. And at the time it was irritating, but I think I wouldn't have been so determined to do a feature film like that so quickly if it wasn't for the fact that we couldn't really get Bronco's House screened anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, we've been asking people to send in questions if they're watching on YouTube or they want to tweet questions. So this has come in from JD. Were there any particular influences for Bait?
There must have been, but it's very difficult to tell. I mean, you can't create anything in a vacuum, and I know that all films take from other films, and the best films I think take from different, very diverse influences to create something that's new. I think poor films take stuff from maybe one source and create something that's very derivative, but there's a huge sliding scale there. So I think I'm very open to lots of different influences. It's very difficult for me to know what they are because I'm not that conscious of what's influencing me, really. That question is hard to answer as well, because I've been out traveling with the film for so long, which is obviously suddenly stopped. I've done nearly 80 Q&As about the film, and I get told a lot in Q&As what the influences were on me whilst making the film. People say, "Oh, clearly you're drawing from this and clearly you're drawing from that." it's got to a stage now where I cannot remember whether I have been influenced by those filmmakers or not. Sometimes I can't even remember whether I saw the films that I'm supposed to be influenced by before I made Bait or after Bait. So it's very difficult to answer. But I think I'm always thinking of certain filmmakers. I think, you know, it's been commented a lot. Nick Rogue's never far away from my thought when communicating ideas of time and temporal and geographical dislocation, which I'm very interested in when it comes to film. As a the determination to keep it simple that comes from Bresson is always something that I'm thinking about. I'm a big believer in Scorsese's mantra of when you're stuck, just think, what would Bresson do? And it's always the simplest thing that you can do. Just throw away the crazy complications that are, or all the possibilities that are available to you through this brilliant art form, and just get down to the basics of what you want to, of what you need to do. So quite often myself and my lighting cameraman Colin Holt, we'd go to a location and look at a scene and think, right, this is how I've shot listed it. It's 9 shots, and then we'll say, can we do it in 8? Can we do it in 7? Not ever getting down to just going, right, let's do it in one big wide shot. It's still all about montage, but it's like, how can we simplify this? And I think then I start thinking of people like Humphrey Jennings and that generation of documentary filmmakers. And he's an example of somebody that I don't think I'd seen his work in any depth until after I'd made Bait. But now I've kind of watched it all. He's become a retrospective influence. And I don't believe time is chronological anyway. So maybe watching his work after I made Bait doesn't rule out him being an influence on me before I made it.
At the end of Bait, there's a dedication to somebody who was a mentor for you, which is Nick. So do you want to say something and who he was and why he was so important to you?
Yeah, Nick Dark was a huge, well, he is a huge influence, because he lives on through his work, and he lives on in my mind through the conversations I had with him about 2 things really. One was writing. He was a playwright, amongst other things. So his writing is still around, and I'm writing an outline for a new project today, and I can hear him talking while I'm writing, while I'm deciding what needs to go into this outline, what's important, what isn't important. But also he was very important for me in establishing my identity as a Cornish person, which has always been complicated growing up, which I think it is for a lot of Cornish people who feel a sense of separation from England, but can't define it in necessarily positive ways. And he made sense of that for me in person and in and through his work. So Nick's a huge remains a huge influence, and always will be. I think for me, he's the great sort of voice of Cornwall. I mean, predominantly working through the theatre, but also in film and television as well.
That leads us rather nicely into a question that's come in from Fran Martin on Facebook. Have you found a difference in the reactions from Cornish to non-Cornish people in relation to Bait?
No. I mean, on the surface, maybe, but no, I haven't. Which is really comforting. I mean, some people who are very close to the subject matter may, have issues with certain things that happen in the film, certain portrayals in the film. Some people who are very close to the subject matter may be enthused about it to a greater degree than other people. But what's been really heartening is whenever I've shown the film, and the positive response I've experienced, because in a Q&A environment, you don't tend to get the negative response. I don't think, especially in this country, people don't, they might mumble a bit under their breath and walk out. But, I've been at festivals in other countries where there's sort of stand-up rows during the Q&As, and there's a sort of more of a outward expression of passion about things. But certainly in the British Q&As, the people who talk to you afterwards they're very positive about the work, and and usually for the same reasons. And that positivity has been kind of wherever I've gone with the film, which is great, because it is for me, it's a very specific setting. Although the specific location is made up, it's a composite. It's a very specific type of person, type of community, and I thought quite a specific story to a very specific area. But what's actually happened is going around the world with the film, the feedback has been the same. The issues are all the same, which in some ways is quite depressing, but also it's quite invigorating and uplifting to realize that despite what some people want to tell you, actually we're all exactly the same. We might look a bit different, we might talk a bit different, but we've all got the same needs and fears and dreams, so there is a universality to it, which has probably been the most rewarding thing from traveling with the film.
Interestingly, you and I have done a few Q&As outside of Cornwall, and then the most nervous I've ever seen you was doing the one in Newlyn. And I said, what's up? It's a home audience. And you said, yeah, that's why I'm scared. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think by the time we screened the film in Newlyn, I'd been all over the place. I'd been to Berlin, I'd been to New York, I've been to Istanbul, I've been to Austria, I've been to all Finland a couple of times, all over the place. And I was introducing the film in front of the audience, looking at all those faces. I could introduce the film, they would watch the film, we'd do a Q&A, even if they hated it, even if it upset them for some reason. I was out of there 2 or 3 days later, and I could promise to myself I'd never go back there. But I live here, so yeah, people are gonna come. People are gonna come up to you on the street and tell you what they think about the film, and it's been great. And I'm sure it's not universal round here, and it isn't, as I've said before, in case anybody in the vicinity is watching. It's not an invitation to come up and tell me that you hate the film. Not that you're allowed to anyway, because you can't come close. But it's but I think that was nerve-wracking because of that, because I knew I was going to see the audience afterwards. I think we were chatting in the bar of the Newlyn Film House, this instance you're talking about, and I was just catching out the corner of my eye, going, oh wow, he's here, or oh, she's here, and just thinking and projecting, before they'd even watched the film, projecting what I thought they were going to think about the film, and suddenly that became very real. And also, it's a film about, well, it's not a film about the people here, but it's certainly the narrative is carried by characters who may be based on people or combinations of people I know.
Yeah.
And that's worrying, because I've done that. I've done Bronco's House. We filmed the whole thing in Mousehole, and although it's not about specific people in Mousehole, because it's unapologetically and entirely set in Mousehole, I think I worry that people think, oh, this is a comment on Mousehole, and then people who live around here think, oh, is that character supposed to be me, or is that character supposed to be? With Bait, we deliberately created a composite place from lots of different locations. So the estate is shot in Sennen, which is just down the road here, but the harbour is up in Charlestown, up the sort of further east up in Cornwall. There's bits in Penzance, there's bits over towards St Ives. So nobody would say, oh, it's a comment on this place or that place. And that was a sort of a bit of a sort of distancing technique. But I still, it still does worry me that people think, is that a portrayal of me up on the screen? So that was what I was going through that night in Newlyn.
Here's another question that's come in from John McCall. Tell us about the amazing soundtrack. I love the soundtrack album with the dialogue interspersed between the music. I've been playing a lot of tracks from it on the Scala show. Tell us about that soundtrack.
Well, the sound, I created the soundtrack using a new analog synthesizer that my friend, the musician Gweno, had suggested I try out, because I was looking for a distraction from editing the film, because it was so all consuming, and I was doing so much of it by myself that I needed a bit of a distraction. So I decided I was going to try and make some sounds on this synthesizer. God, I can't say it. But what happened was I started making these sounds as a distraction. Notice I'm not calling it music. And then, but then I started laying them into the edit, because I was editing at the same time, and obviously it was happening in the same space. And I started thinking, God, these drones that I'm making are sort of sounding like a sort of out of tune accordion sound, which is also synonymous with the C. And I started dropping them into the film, and what was great, because everything's shot silently, I have to add all of the sound afterwards.
Yeah.
And although I do work with a great sound designer, Daniel Thompson, who does most of the Foley later on before the mix, I do create quite a lot of the Foley roughly in the studio in order to get the rhythms of the edit working. And some of the Foley's really hard work, really laborious, like the sound of footsteps on shingle. So there's a scene in the film where Martin, the protagonist, is hauling a net one morning, and there's loads of sound going on. There's the sound of all the waves. There would be his footsteps. There's the net being dragged. There's the anchor across the shingle. All this kind of stuff, which would take me so long to Foley it. But by dropping a drone in, suddenly it was like, I don't need any of that, So I could say that it was purely a sort of artistic decision, but a lot of it is problem solving and working out how you can make jobs easier, which I think goes back to that Bresson thing of keep it simple. But then what happened was Reg Invader sent me a message on Instagram just saying, do you want to release the score? Do you want, we'll release the score. And Invader, Reg and Jeff Barrow just kind of were just really keen to get the score out there. And I was a bit self-conscious at first. At first I was thinking maybe they could do an album with the songs that we use in the film as well. But because the drones are so minimal, I think it would have been quite a strange album if it combined these kind of pop songs with the drone. So we decided just to go with the original soundtrack, drones, and then I just added in some bits of key dialogue, some bits that I liked, and kind of inspired by listening to the Pulp Fiction soundtrack all those years ago when there were those great little snippets of dialogue in between. I thought, maybe it sounds a lot grander than it was. I didn't give myself a credit on the film for the score, because I just thought it was one thing too many. Having written it, directed it, shot it, hand processed it, edited it, I did think singing the theme tune as well was one step too far. So I kept that. I kept it anonymous. But I'm so glad that the soundtrack seems to be being received well. It's
a great thing, and it's
a little bonus.
A great thing. That's a great artifact. Here's another question. This is from Lydia. What's Mark's favorite book or film from the selection behind him? From the selection ostentatiously behind him, Mark. You've literally positioned yourself in front of a library of influence. So what's your favorite book or film?
That's just wallpaper. I woke up 2 days ago in the middle of the night thinking I've got to finish the shelves. These are brand new. I thought I've got to finish the shelves before Tuesday night. My favorite film book is, I think, probably the Hitchcock Truffaut book there. Favorite film? Yeah, that's an easy one, isn't it?
Pick a few.
Okay. Radio On.
Yeah, which is an absolutely brilliant movie by Chris Pettit. If anyone hasn't seen it, do go out and see it. Best movie ever.
I can just see it's got the Region 1 and the Region 2 versions. Something I was looking at earlier, Big Wednesday.
Which is fantastic.
The BFI very kindly sent me the Blu-ray box set of all the Alan Clark stuff. I mean, it's technically TV, but they're films for me. So they're very important. And The Garden by Derek Jarman.
Yeah.
And I'd have to say Walkabout Performance and Don't Look Now as a pretty strong start to a career.
Those are brilliant choices. I'm particularly glad that you included Radio 1. I mean, you know, a Big Wednesday is fabulous, but I think of all of those, Radio 1 is the one that has the sort of the closest place in my heart. Let me just ask you one thing. You mentioned before about that soundtrack album. You said I was influenced by Pulp Fiction. Tell us the story, which I found hilarious at the time, of what happened at the BAFTAs after you had won a BAFTA and Tarantino was there.
Yeah, well, I was on. So I don't know if you've won a BAFTA. When you win a BAFTA, you go downstairs and you have to do
most of us haven't, right? Assume for the purpose of this, most of us watching this haven't.
I'm so glad you mentioned this though, because me and Mary, my partner, were having a discussion earlier. I said, should I have my BAFTA in the background for this? And she said, yeah. and I went and got it and put it there. And I thought, and as soon as I looked at it on the screen, I thought, I cannot do that. So it's back downstairs. But you, yeah. So after we picked up our, you know, Kate and Lynn, the producers of the film, we all went downstairs, or not downstairs, but backstage to do photo shoots, press conferences, and all this kind of stuff. And you'd gone for about 45 minutes, and then by the time I came back, where everybody was going in and out of the doors, nobody was moving because it was the in memoriam section was happening, so nobody was going back in. You couldn't see it because we were outside, but nobody was going in. So and there was this guy stood in the doorway, and I thought, oh, it's Quentin Tarantino. So I went over, and I wasn't going into the auditorium, I was just going into the corridor, so I wasn't interrupting anything that was happening. But I walked up to him, and I held the BAFTA unnecessarily high in my hands like that, and just went, oh, and pretend I didn't know who it was. I went, oh, excuse me. And I went to walk through, and he went, hey, you're the bait guy. I'm not going to do the voice. He said, you're the bait guy. And I said, oh, yeah. And he said, I was watching the clips and I was thinking, what is this film? Is it an Italian film that I didn't know about? And then it was modern, but it was old. And I was thinking, what's going on? And you know, I was just listening to him. And he said, because, and then he said, I realized what it was. It was so special. He said, you post-synced it all. And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah, because I did a film that was with a friend of mine that were these, we did a thing called Grindhouse. And I was thinking, yeah, I know. And he said, but we didn't post sync it. You've taken it one step further. And I was thinking, well, this is a weird conversation to be having. And then he said, have you got a print of it? And I said, yeah, we got a 35mm print. And he said, oh, come over, we'll show it in my cinema. I've got a cinema in Hollywood. So I was like, yeah, okay. and you know, and hopefully that's going to happen. It's been delayed, obviously, but hopefully at some point. Yeah, but I mean, you know, that was one of several really bizarre moments that night or that, you know, that weekend. But yeah, that was probably the strangest one.
Have you got time to answer another question that's come in? This is from Dula. This says, greetings from Cork. Bait has become a bit of a phenomenon in the UK, largely through word of mouth. How do you feel about this word of mouth being analog in itself?
Well, firstly, hello in Cork. I absolutely love Cork. Been over there, got some friends in Cork in the film world over there at the Cork Film Festival and the Triskel and everything. I could happily live in Cork if I wasn't absolutely committed to living in Cornwall. Yeah, the word of mouth thing is phenomenal, really. And BFI Distribution, who distributed the film, still distributing the film, and are involved now in the international distribution of the film, who have just been utterly incredible. I think they always felt that it would be a word of mouth, you know, it would be a slow burner with a sort of long tail because of the word of mouth. But I think what happened was in some ways we got lucky with our timing, and also we got some great reviews, you know, from not least from yourself, Mark, who really brought the film into the film conversation. And I think the film was widely distributed enough that it was talked about and enough people saw it, but it wasn't so widely distributed that everybody could see it. So the fact that some people couldn't see it sort of built up this sort of hunger to see it, or that, that's what it seemed like from my point of view. So yeah, I just think as an audience member, it's, aside from bait, it's really exciting that word of mouth is that powerful. And I've heard of phenomenons in the past. And the first time I ever heard that expression, I think, was about the book Captain Corelli's Mandolin, which apparently was a huge word of mouth success. And I always think of Captain Corelli's Mandolin when anybody says word of mouth. And so yeah, it's exciting, and things spread between people, as we as we can see at the moment, So if somebody likes something or it grabs somebody's attention, they will tell people, and those people will tell people, and suddenly you've got this this great this big audience or a relatively big audience that builds. So yeah, it's been amazing, but it's very difficult for me to tell what's gone on with the film, really, because obviously I've been living every minute of it for the last year and a bit since we premiered it in Berlin. So for me, it's a massive phenomenon, but that's talking about me because it's I'm at the center of it. So it's been interesting to sort of be able to observe Twitter and things like Letterboxd and that kind of stuff to see where the film's going and how it's done that without a huge marketing budget. We haven't been on the side of buses and all of that kind of stuff. It's just kind of it's kind of crept out there with, like I say, great support from critics, great audiences at festivals, great audiences at cinemas, and a fair wind, really.
Let me ask you a final question. You're a filmmaker, but you're quoted on the poster and the publicity for his new film, Whalebone Box, which I think opens on Mubi on Friday. Would have been theatrical at home, but obviously under the current circumstance. I'm a huge fan of Andrew Cotting, and I always thought that you and he were kindred spirits. Do you want to just say a few words about Cotting and about Whalebone Box, since you are quoted on the poster? I think you call it a magisterial road movie.
Yeah, I think it's yet another magisterial road movie. I think I wrote a longer piece, and that's the bit they used. But yeah, I was sort of bowled over, really. I had an email from the publicist for the film saying, "Would you write something?" And I just thought, wow, how have I got here? Suddenly my opinion on Andrew's work is wanted, because he's all, I saw Gallivant many years ago, and it was similar to the first time I saw Derek Jarman's The Garden, and it just stopped me and went, wow, what is this? And made me go, oh right, you can make films like this. That was the thing. And he, Andrew's just brilliant, prolific. His work is so funny, it's so human, it's so moving. I don't understand why it's so moving. I don't understand why it's so poignant. I don't understand why it's so funny. But that's why I keep wanting to watch it, because every film is a new riddle, and personally helps me understand the world a little bit more. And he's never, he's not making films that say, right, this is a film that's going to make you understand the world. It's just the human condition. And the more bonkers and bizarre and expressionistic and abstract it is, the more it makes sense to me. And the Whalebone Box is just, I mean, he told me about the film a while ago, and I think it was just when I was starting to write the horror film that we were due to shoot in May. And he was saying, he said, I'm writing a horror film as well. So I don't know what I was expecting, whether I was, like some kind of sort of, classic jump scare horror film or something. But what he's come back with was what I saw when I was sent the screener. I had no idea where it was going. There's sequences in it. There's a sequence in the Natural History Museum that when I was watching it, I just felt like I floated out of the chair, true moment of transcendence. and just the most amazing end to the film, a beautiful exploration of him and his daughter Eden's relationship, which is at the heart of a lot of his work, but I think has gone deeper this time than ever before. And it's just, you know, I think you've said it before, you know, I'm paraphrasing you, but you know, his work is absolutely essential. It's it's totally brilliant and totally necessary. So yeah, just urge everybody to watch it. It's for me, it's just another masterpiece.
It's great to hear you championing his work so much, because I think he is a brilliant filmmaker. I think, as you know as well, I think your work is extraordinary. I think Bait is, you know, as I said, I think my favorite film of the last 10 years. Just let me do this little bit of official stuff, which is thank you to BFI Distribution for making tonight's event possible, for everything they've done for Bait. The next Curzon, Haifa Mansour, will talk about her new film, The Perfect Candidate, which is a terrific film. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. And they've just confirmed for the 14th of April, Asif Kapadia will be talking about Diego Maradona, doing one of the Curzon Living Room Q&As. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for all your questions, and thanks to the brilliant Mark Jenkin.